A thug cop slapped an 82-year-old veteran straight across the face, sending the old man crashing to the tile floor under the horrified eyes of everyone in the room. The entire place froze. No one dared intervene. No one dared utter a word, as if fear had locked their throats tight. The cop let out a loud laugh, convinced he was the untouchable king of the town, convinced the uniform on his back shielded him from any consequences. But he just made a fatal mistake. He had no idea the old man he'd just struck was the father of a veteran Hell's Angel. And when the door rattled from the approaching roar of Harley engines, all of Bozeman would soon find out what happens when an angel in leather comes home. Mid-January in Bozeman, Montana, winter had draped the town in a heavy silence, so thick it felt like time itself had frozen solid. Snow fell without pause, deep enough to swallow entire walkways, while wind off the Bridger Mountains whipped down sharp as a blade, slicing across faces, necks, and lives long accustomed to the cold. Signs rattled in gusts, streetlights flickered behind curtains of white, and every movement was slow, cautious, as if the whole town were holding its breath for something to come. Against that backdrop, an old figure emerged from the narrow road down from Hyalite Canyon. Elias Carter, 82 years old, back slightly stooped, but each step still deliberate and steady. He lived alone in a weathered wooden cabin, where every object carried the marks of time and memories of the wife who'd left him years before. A few locals called him Mr. Carter, some called him Old Eli, but everyone gave him the quiet respect small American towns reserve for those they know are good people, who sacrificed, who lived honestly. Every morning, storm or clear skies, Elias walked down to the Gallatin Diner, a simple joint right on the corner of Main Street. Harper Quinn, the young waitress with her hair tied back in a messy ponytail, and eyes always full of kindness, greeted him with a steaming cup of black coffee. For Elias, it wasn't just cheap coffee, it was the last thread connecting him to a world that was drifting further away every day. The diner was where he sat for a few dozen minutes each morning, listening to the door swing open. Cups clink, people talk about the weather or gas prices, small sounds that kept him anchored. But lately, cracks had started to appear in that peace. Madison Ridge Development, the company trying to gobble up land along the national forest to build a luxury resort, kept sending people to Elias's cabin. His parcel was small but sat in a spot too perfect to pass up. Because he refused to sell, the pressure kept mounting. People said strange men had been seen lurking around his cabin. People said they had backing from powerful folks in town. Elias heard the talk but pretended not to care. He just wanted to live out his final years in the place he and his wife had called home. What no one in town knew, because Elias never bragged, was that he had a son, Jackson Carter, 38, a veteran member of the Hells Angels Big Sky chapter. Not the weekend warrior or rebel without a cause type, but the brother the whole chapter leaned on when they needed both muscle and clear thinking. Right then, Jackson was escorting a veterans memorial run in Idaho, hundreds of miles from home. Elias had never told anyone his son was a Hell's Angel, not out of shame, but because he knew people judge leather and ink faster than they judge a man's heart. That morning, just as Elias raised his coffee to his lips, the diner door slammed open so hard the cold wind blasted in and made everyone jump. Deputy Cole Maddox stepped inside, the man whose mere presence was enough to scare anyone in town. He wore the sheriff's uniform, but his eyes were thick with booze, hate, and twisted power. Harper went pale behind the counter. She looked at Elias with an expression he'd never seen from her before. Pure, desperate warning. "Mr. Elias," she whispered, barely audible, "you shouldn't have come out today." The moment Deputy Cole Maddox walked into the Gallatin Diner, the atmosphere turned dark like someone had killed the lights and drawn the curtains. He staggered, but the sheriff's uniform still hung on him with the shameless arrogance the whole town of Bozeman knew too well. The stench of liquor rolled in with him, mixing with the biting outdoor cold and turning the air inside thick and suffocating. Every customer lowered their head, avoiding Maddox's bloodshot stare the way you'd avoid a rabid animal about to snap. Harper Quinn froze mid-wipe behind the counter, her whole body rigid as if she'd just seen a whiteout blizzard about to swallow everything. Maddox had a vicious reputation around the county, drunk on duty, abusing power, terrorizing locals, and especially quietly strong-arming small landowners into selling to Madison Ridge Development. Everyone knew he did it for kickbacks, and everyone knew he'd ruin anyone who stood in his way. And this morning his target was the old man sitting at table 3, the same seat he'd occupied for the last 20 years. Maddox strode over to Elias Carter's table, lips curled in a half-hostile, half-gleeful grin, like he'd been waiting for this moment forever. Without a word, he slammed a piece of paper down hard enough to make the spoon jump. The voluntary land sale form he'd been trying to shove at Elias for weeks. He tapped the paper 3 times, hard final taps like he was hammering prison bars, then leaned in close, snorting with contempt. "Sign it, old man," Maddox said through clenched teeth, dragging out every syllable like a needle. This country wasn't built for people clinging to dirt. A few customers flinched, some turned away, others pretended to stare out the window. They all knew this was wrong, but nobody was about to take on a drunk cop, especially one backed by the richest real estate outfit in the region. Elias looked up slowly, eyes steady, no tremor in them. "I already told you," he answered softly, voice raspy with age but clear. "I'm not selling. That's where my wife is buried." The words made Maddox's face flush crimson, like a thin but razor-sharp blade had sliced his paper-thin pride. He slammed the table so hard the hot coffee spilled over Elias's hand and shirt, making the old man flinch. Harper couldn't hold back a small, worried cry, hand flying to her mouth. No one moved. No one said stop. Only Harper, still too young to swallow injustice quietly, slipped her phone under her apron and silently hit record. Maddox bent down, rough fingers ripping the old cap off Elias's head, the cap he wore every single day, a relic of the years he'd served his country. He glanced at it like it was trash and tossed it to the floor, letting it spin a few times before it stopped under the table. "Don't you see you're a burden on society?" Maddox growled. "Old men should know when to get out of the way. Don't waste the government's time," he snorted again. "And don't think that piece of shit biker son of yours can do anything about it." Elias froze, a flicker of real pain crossing his face for the first time that morning. Not from the scalding coffee, but from the humiliation of being treated like garbage in the place where people once treated him like a friend. Maddox slammed the table again, harder. He kicked Elias's chair, nearly toppling the old man. "I'm arresting you for resisting an officer," he roared, spraying booze breath in the old man's face. Harper started crying silently, fighting to keep the sobs in. Elias sat there, hands trembling, not from fear but from shame and helplessness. "My son," he whispered, so low only Maddox could hear. "He will come back." That was the last straw. Maddox hated bikers. He especially hated Hell's Angels. The words son and come back made his eyes go feral. Without thinking, without even trying to hide the madness, he swung hard. Smack. The dry, cracking sound echoed louder than anything else in the diner that morning. Cups, silverware, distant conversation. Everything stopped dead. Elias toppled sideways, crashing to the hard tile floor. His old glasses flew off, skittering meters away, and a thin line of blood started spreading from his lip. Harper clapped a hand over her mouth, tears streaming, stumbling back as if Maddox had slapped her too. A few customers half rose in reflex, then sat right back down, terrified of being noticed. Maddox stood panting, like he'd just won a fight no one wanted to watch. Then he immediately started staging the scene. "He attacked me," he shouted. "Self-defense. Anyone says different gets locked up." No one spoke. Harper gripped her phone tighter, hands shaking violently, keeping it low and hidden under her apron. In the corner, a young man, Bo Lindell, sat motionless. His backpack was on the seat beside him, a small GoPro clipped to the strap recording since he walked in. When Maddox struck Elias, Bo went white. He whispered, almost soundlessly, "Jesus. He has no idea what he just did." Without hesitation, Bo reached into the bag, hit upload to the cloud, just in case Maddox smashed the camera, just in case the evidence disappeared. Maddox didn't care who was watching. He grabbed Elias's arm and yanked him up. The old man's frail body couldn't brace itself. His fingers clawed at empty air before he was dragged off like a sack of grain. He didn't do anything wrong. Harper screamed before she could stop herself. Maddox whipped his head around, eyes full of threat. "One more word and you're under arrest." Harper went silent, tears rolling down her cheeks. No one moved. No one dared breathe loud. They all watched helplessly as the old man was dragged out the door, his feet scraping through the snow, leaving a long streak of desperation. Harper turned to Bo, voice trembling like she was about to collapse. "Jackson Carter, Mr. Elias's son. He won't let this go." Maddox laughed, the laugh of a man drunk on power. "I'd love to see any biker try to challenge the law." At the exact moment Maddox dragged Elias out of the Gallatin diner and dumped him in the needle-sharp snow, More than 200 miles away on a highway outside Twin Falls, Idaho, the steady thunder of Harley-Davidson engines beat like the heartbeat of men who never leave a brother behind. Jackson Carter rode point on his glossy black street glide, leading an escort of more than 30 bikers from multiple chapters as they accompanied a group of elderly veterans to the local memorial for the annual ceremony. Every engine note, every nod exchanged on the road carried the deep respect baked into the blood of men who knew loss, honor, and the promise, never alone. Jackson had ridden thousands of miles in his life, but that morning something gnawed at his chest, a restless feeling veteran bikers can smell from miles away, like rain before the storm. He was debating whether to call his dad when the phone in his cut buzzed hard. He slowed, signaled the column to the right lane, and pulled over at a small gas station. He peeled off his gloves, swiped the screen, and saw the name that stopped his heart. Harper Quinn. The message was 3 words. "You need to see this." Attached was a link marked "You Argent." Seconds later the phone buzzed again. "Bo Lindell." Second message. "I uploaded the original. Maddox beat the old man." Video. Jackson didn't wait another second. He opened the clip. The screen lit up, and in the first few seconds his whole body turned to stone. He saw his father, the man tough enough to survive everything life had thrown at him, sitting helpless in the diner. He saw Maddox approach, saw the contempt in his eyes, saw him rip the old cap off his dad's head, and then he heard the words, "My son will come back." Then the slap, the dry crack through the phone speaker hit like a gunshot beside his ear. Jackson stood rooted to the ground, knuckles white around the phone, and every biker behind him went quiet when they saw his face shift from shock to pain to a nameless rage. The kind of rage anyone who ever touched a Hells Angels family knows is a death sentence no one escapes. He took a deep breath, but it came out ragged and choked. He replayed the slap 3 times, then a 4th. Each viewing poured gasoline on the fire, roaring in his chest, until even the brothers standing closest could feel the heat rolling off his deadly silence. Then Jackson keyed the mic on his handlebar radio. His voice was low, ice cold. "Big Sky Chapter, respond." Less than 2 seconds later 3 deep voices answered at once. "Here, what's up? Jax, you sound off." Jackson didn't answer. He simply played the 30-second clip, Maddox slapping Elias over the open channel. When it ended, dead air lasted the longest 5 seconds of their lives. Then Stone, the chapter VP, spoke, voice unbelievably low. "He slapped your dad," Jackson answered flat. "Yeah." Silence again. Then Ridge, the road captain, growled like a bear. "That motherfucker just signed his own death warrant." Stone came back. "No filter left. Call up the whole chapter. This is red flag. Repeat, red flag protocol. Priority 1. No discussion. No questions. Just the simultaneous roar of engines firing up over the radio, oaths sworn to the sky. Another brother cut in. "We're in Butte. 1 hour out. Great Falls chapter. Rolling south. 2 hours. Billings is moving. You don't hit a veteran. Idaho Falls turning around now. Jackson. Send coordinates." Jackson stared down the highway. The long road back to Montana. Back home. Back to his dad. His eyes were red, but not from the cold. "Sent," he said. "I'll be in Bozeman before you." Stone answered instantly. "Negative, Jax. Wait for your brothers." Jackson shook his head even though they couldn't see it. "They dragged my dad out of the diner like a criminal. I'm not waiting." A beat of silence. Then Stone said the words every biker hearing them tightened their grip on the bars for, "Then we ride like hell." The column behind Jackson was already moving. They didn't need to ask what happened. One look at his face told them someone had broken the ultimate taboo. They touched a Hells Angels family. An older brother, Doc, walked up and put a hand on Jackson's shoulder. "Let's ride, son. We're bringing your old man home." Jackson nodded, pulled on his gloves, and thumbed the starter. His Harley roared to life, blending with the thunder of 30-plus bikes behind him, into a wall of sound like rolling thunder on the horizon. He keyed the mic one last time, voice steady and terrifying. "Big Sky, Idaho Falls, Billings, Butte, Great Falls, all chapters green. A veteran got hit. We're coming home to Montana." Then he rolled on the throttle. The black Harley shot forward like a dark arrow through the snow, leaving the memorial escort peeling off and turning north. One of the riders behind him said to the man beside him, voice shaking with awe and dread, "The guy who hit an old man has no clue." The other asked, "No clue about what?" He answered, eyes locked on Jackson disappearing into the white. "No clue whose father he just hit." And with that, the real storm began. Red flag protocol isn't written down or posted on any clubhouse wall. It lives as sacred law among men who live by honor, loyalty, and brotherhood. An unwritten rule triggered only when one of three things happens. A member is in mortal danger, a member's family is threatened, or their right to basic justice is trampled. No one knows exactly when it started. They only know that when red flag goes up, everything else stops. Every plan is dropped and every biker within hundreds of miles turns like wolves, hearing a wounded packmate's howl. And that morning, when the video of Maddox slapping Elias spread across radios and phones between chapters, red flag exploded like lightning ripping through the gray rocky sky. On the ride back to Montana, Jackson flew as if pulled by an invisible rope while behind him the escort column split. Half continued the memorial run, the other half turned north to merge with the flood of bikes converging from every direction. Less than 10 minutes after Jackson gave the word, the Big Sky chapter clubhouse in Billings shook with the simultaneous roar of Harleys firing up. Men who'd been drinking coffee, wrenching on bikes, or playing dominoes shot to their feet as if their bodies were pre-programmed for this moment. Stone and Ridge, the chapter's leaders, stepped into the lot and exchanged a single nod, no words needed. Black, red, and silver Harleys rolled out, engines growling deep and rhythmic like ancient war drums. In Butte, another crew got the call, threw legs over seats and left without kissing wives goodbye, without locking doors, without packing a thing. When red flag is raised, you act. No explanations, no extra words, no questions about past or future. In Great Falls, one brother still asleep bolted upright after Jackson's 3 radio words. My dad got hit. He didn't ask who, where, or why, because for them hearing a brother's father was enough to flip every switch to fight mode. 30 minutes later, Montana was no longer just snowfields, white mountains, and empty roads. It became rivers of Harley-Davidsons scattered across the map, all heading south toward Bozeman. Group by group they merged, thundering down Interstate 90 until they formed a steel column no one in their right mind would want to face. Near Livingston, a rare sight appeared, 4 chapters converging at once, the combined roar making the ground vibrate. Massive bikes bearing winged deathhead patches, saddlebags hanging off the back, chrome pipes gleaming in the cold sun stretched out for miles. In that column were giants covered in ink, gray-bearded old-timers with eyes that had seen everything, veterans flying small flags off the back. Outlaws, that's what the world calls them. But to Jackson and the riders tearing toward Bozeman, they didn't need the world's understanding. They knew exactly what bound them together: loyalty, honor, the oath never to betray a brother. People could misunderstand them, fear them, spread whatever rumors they wanted, but one thing was undeniable: when one of theirs gets hurt, especially a kind, lonely old man who gave his life to this country, the whole state of Montana would shake. Jackson rode point, breathing steady but face stretched tight as a bowstring. Every replay of the video poured more fuel on the inferno inside him. Wind slapped his face, whipping his long hair back, but nothing could slow the storm driving him forward. A younger brother riding beside him shouted over the wind. Jack's, Missoula and Wyoming chapters heard too. They're rolling. Jackson didn't look over, just gripped the bars harder. Good, let them come. To his left, Doc, the old-timer who'd seen more than his share of bloody club wars, glanced at Jackson and said in a low, warm rumble, all of Montana's about to learn what Hell's Angels honor looks like. And so the armada of Harleys, road glides, street bobs, softails, fat boys, blasted over hills, around mountain curves, across endless white plains. From a distance the column looked like a steel dragon, twisting through the landscape, every engine roar a heartbeat and hundreds of chests united by one purpose. Elias Carter would be brought home, and the man who touched him would pay. No one in the column talked about violence, no one mentioned revenge, no one had to. They weren't riding to start a war, they were riding for honor. They were riding because they would not accept an old man being humiliated in front of a room full of people. They were riding because of one of the most sacred laws in the biker world. Nobody touches our family. While the column of Harley-Davidsons was tearing toward Montana like an unstoppable wall of steel thunder, on the other side of the country another storm was building. A storm of social media, of outrage, of millions of eyes locked on a 30-second video shot inside a little diner in Bozeman. Just 8 hours after Bo Lindell hit upload to the cloud and posted the clip to his personal page, the view count rocketed past 5 million, 3 million in the first 4 hours, another 2 million in the next 4. Nobody knew who Bo was, but everyone knew what they'd just seen was unacceptable. The video opened with Elias Carter sitting quietly, his slightly trembling hands on the wooden table. Then Maddox walked in, a big shot in town who looked on camera like nothing more than a thug wearing a badge. Viewers watched every brutal gesture, the hat thrown to the floor, the table slammed, the hot coffee spilling on the old man, then the old man hitting the ground from a slap, so hard the camera froze for a split second. The internet detonated at that exact moment. The first comments were pure horror. Holy shit, he clearly didn't do anything wrong. Is that cop drunk? This is straight up abuse of power. Then it wasn't just anger. Veterans groups from every corner of America started sharing the video. Vietnam Veterans of America reposted it with huge red letters. He is one of ours. The American Legion wrote, "Nobody touches an older comrade and walks away." Another organization posted, "We don't care what state he's in. One soldier gets hit. The whole country speaks up." Within 2 hours, the clip was everywhere. Reddit, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. Older vets, gray-haired, voices shaking, recorded short reaction videos. "I don't know who Mr. Carter is, but he's my brother, and this will not stand." The outrage spread so fast that small news outlets started running stories. Hashtags #Justice for Elias, #Protect our veterans, and #Stop police abuse shot to the top. While the whole country was losing its mind, the Kenmore Sheriff's Office in Bozeman was panicking. But instead of owning up or investigating, they took the route corrupt power always takes: blame the victim. A statement went up on the Sheriff's Department Facebook page. An elderly individual resisted cooperation during an ongoing investigation. Deputy Cole Maddox acted according to procedure. That post was already bad, but they made it worse by straight up lying at a short press conference in the backlot. He attempted to assault the officer. We have witnesses. Those lies were a match dropped into a gas can on social media. People got twice, 3 times as angry. Comments flooded the sheriff's page. Where are the witnesses? We have video. You think we're stupid? The video says different. Meanwhile, the man who started it all, Maddox, sat in his office frantically calling friends and leaving threatening voicemails for Harper, demanding she take the video down. Harper got anonymous text, "Delete the clip now, or you lose your job, your house. We know where you live." She was shaking when she read them, but she didn't delete anything. She just locked her phone and hid it under the floor mat behind the counter like it was a live grenade she was terrified to touch. Meanwhile, Bo Lindell, the guy who caught the wide shot on his GoPro, got back to his small apartment near Montana State University to grab backup gear. When he opened the door, he froze. His main camera was smashed on the floor, lens shattered into tiny pieces. His laptop had been slammed so hard the screen was cracked straight across. A note scrawled in marker was taped to the wall. "Don't film anymore." Bo wasn't the type to scare easy, but his chest tightened, not just from the threat, but because it proved what happened to Elias wasn't some random assault. It was the tip of the iceberg. He pulled out his phone, checked the cloud upload. When he saw the little green check mark, he let out a breath and muttered, "You fucked up. The internet doesn't delete." Right then, dozens of small news pages started posting "Veteran slapped by drunk cop. Bozeman, Montana. Police brutality caught on camera." From Washington State, a veteran wrote, "If that old man was my dad, I'd be driving there right now." He had no idea that in eastern Idaho a son was doing exactly that, with hundreds of bikers behind him. When the video passed 5 million views, someone made a side-by-side photo of Maddox and Elias with red text. "This man assaulted a veteran." That image spread like wildfire. Big media started paying attention. Biker groups across the country shared the clip with the caption, "Nobody touches old people. Nobody touches a brother's father." And in the middle of all that rage, far away, wind howling through the night, snow flying sideways, the roar of Harley Davidsons was getting closer to Bozeman like rolling thunder on the ground. The storm was coming, but it wasn't a Montana winter storm. It was the storm of truth, justice, and honor that men like Maddox would never understand. When the video hit 5 million views and social media was ready to explode, Jackson Carter had already blown past West Yellowstone, his Harley's tires slicing through the snow like a blade across ice. Wind screamed. The engine roared like the rage pounding in his chest, so hard it felt like it would crack his ribs. He'd left the rest of the column 10 minutes behind, riding alone at the front, now less than half an hour from Bozeman. When he rolled into downtown, people startled, not because of the ink or the leather, but because of the aura around him, the kind only a man with nothing left to lose except his family's honor and blood can carry. When Jackson stopped in front of the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office, snow exploded in a white ring from under his tires. He killed the engine, pulled off his helmet, took one long breath, and walked straight up the steps. His eyes weren't normal biker eyes anymore. They were cold and still, like the silence in the mountains right before an avalanche. The door opened before he reached it. A young deputy stood there, face white, when he saw the Hells Angels Big Sky chapter patch on Jackson's cut. "I need to see my father," Jackson said, voice low, deep, hard as steel. "Elias Carter, you took him this morning." The deputy stammered. I don't know." Jackson took one step closer. "Take me to whoever's in charge here." His voice wasn't loud, but the room behind the deputy went dead quiet. Moments later, Sheriff Walt Kenmore stepped into the hallway, a big man with salt and pepper hair, cold face and eyes the color of muddy pond water. He crossed his arms and stood in front of Jackson, without hiding his contempt. "Oh," Kenmore said, lips curling. "So you're the biker son of that old man." The words landed like a cold knife. Jackson didn't react, just stared straight and spoke slow. "I'll ask again, where is my father?" Kenmore shrugged like it was nothing. "He's being investigated. Assaulting an officer is serious." A terrifying silence fell over the hallway. Jackson looked at him the way you look at an animal, about to attack the innocent. "You sure about that?" he asked, way too soft for the storm churning inside him. Kenmore smirked. "Damn sure. And you should be thanking me for letting you walk in here without cuffs." A deputy behind Kenmore swallowed hard. He could see Jackson's body coiled like a spring pulled to the limit, but Jackson didn't explode. He did what the most dangerous men do. He stayed calm. "You know you're holding my father illegally, right?" Jackson said. "No paperwork, no valid report. It's all on video." Kenmore's face flickered for a second. Then he went back to board. "Don't lawyer me, son. I am the law here." That was the moment the air turned thick enough to choke on. The three deputies nearby looked at each other in panic. Everyone knew Kenmore liked to bully, but saying that straight to a biker looking for his father, backed by 5 chapters already riding into Bozeman, was crossing a line he couldn't uncross. Jackson took one step forward, close enough that only inches separated him from Kenmore. "The law isn't something you make up to protect your ego," Jackson said, voice even but sharp as a honed blade. "And if you think you can keep an old man locked up just to cover for your deputy's crime, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." Kenmore gave a tight, fake smile, pretending he wasn't shaken. "You threatening me?" "No," Jackson answered. "I don't need to threaten anyone." The young deputy by the door was shaking. He didn't know whether to step in or run. Jackson continued, every word clear. "I just want my father alive, right now." Silence fell again, so heavy you could hear a pin drop. Then Kenmore waved a hand. "Get him out of here." 2 deputies stepped forward hesitantly, clearly not wanting to touch Jackson but afraid to disobey. Jackson turned his head, gave them one look, and both men froze like they'd been flash frozen. Jackson turned back to Kenmore. 5 chapters are on their way here. The rest have seen the video. The whole country is watching Bozeman. Don't turn this into a battle line. Kenmore's face went red with anger, but he still managed arrogance. "Let's see what you bikers can actually do." In that moment, Jackson realized it wasn't just Maddox. The sheriff was neck-deep in the land grab scheme too, and Elias was just the latest victim. No doubt left, his dad was being held illegally. From the end of the hallway a figure appeared, a woman with long blonde hair hastily tied back, wearing a thin sweater, eyes flickering with fear. Mara Kenmore, the sheriff's wife. She stood clutching a file folder like it was a heavy secret. When her eyes met Jackson's, he saw the message clear. She knew the truth, and she was on the right side. Kenmore turned, saw his wife staring at Jackson, and snapped, "Mara, go home." She flinched, looked down, avoided her husband's eyes, and backed away, but she didn't break eye contact with Jackson until she was out of the hallway. That look, the look of someone who'd seen wrong for years, but hadn't found the courage to speak, told Jackson his father was in real danger. He turned back to Kenmore, voice low like a Harley idling before it rips. "Fine, I'll be back." Kenmore shrugged. "Be my guest." And right then, outside the first Harley engine rumbled, deep, heavy, long like distant thunder announcing the storm. A sound any small-town cop dreads. Harley Davidsons were here. Jackson looked Kenmore dead in the eye. No smile, no threat, just one sentence that sent chills down every spine in the hallway. "You're running out of time." The moment Jackson stepped out of the Gallatin County Sheriff's office, and the first Harley growl echoed in the distance, a different kind of unrest spread through Bozeman, quieter, more vicious and calculated. Because before the bikers arrived, before the truth had a chance to come out, the people with power in town had already moved the way small towns always do. Silence, anyone who knew too much. And Harper Quinn was the first to pay the price. She'd just walked into the Gallatin diner for the afternoon shift, when her boss was standing at the door, hands in his pockets, face heavy, like he'd been forced into something he hated. "Harper," he said, voice thick, "we need to talk." Harper knew instantly. She'd heard the threats. She'd seen the anonymous messages. She knew Maddox wouldn't let it go, but hearing and knowing is never the same as facing it. Her boss sighed, and shaking a little as he handed her an envelope. "I'm real sorry. The sheriff's department called this morning. They said, if I kept you on, they'd inspect every license, fine us for everything. I can't lose the diner." Harper said nothing. She didn't cry. She just bit her lip hard enough to keep the blood inside. "I only did what was right," she whispered. Her boss looked at the floor, unable to meet the disappointment in the young woman's eyes. "Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't save anybody, Harper." Those words twisted like a knife. Harper hugged her apron to her chest, walked out of the diner, not knowing where to go or what to do next. The customers inside avoided her eyes, as if getting fired was bad luck they didn't want to catch. As she passed the counter, she saw Elias's coffee cup still sitting there, unwashed, like a reminder of how badly this town had failed by staying silent. While Harper was losing her job, not far away at a small gas station, a middle-aged man named Wallace Brinks, owner of the parcel next to Elias's cabin, was telling two neighbors his story in a voice that shook with trauma. "I'm telling you, Maddox came to my door at 11 at night," Wallace whispered, eyes darting around like someone might hear. "Stood there with his hand on his gun, told me I should reconsider selling the land or something would happen." The other two men exchanged looks and lowered their voices. "You report it to the sheriff?" Wallace let out a laugh more terrifying than crying. "Kenmore's the one who sent him. You think I'm stupid enough to report it to the guy who hired Maddox?" One of them said, "But Elias got beat. His biker son is bringing the whole chapter to Bozeman. Town's gonna explode." Wallace turned, eyes wet but sharp. "If those bikers weren't coming, nobody in this town would open their mouth. Don't kid yourselves." Those words weren't just fear. They were the truth everyone knew but refused to say. Bozeman looked like a peaceful tourist and college town, but under the pretty surface was a tangled web. Cops in bed with local government, government shaking hands with developers, developers trying to steal people's land. And in that web, men like Maddox survived, because the town knew and stayed quiet, a stubborn, terrifying, cruel kind of silence. As noon got closer, Bozeman split cleanly in two. One half, the people afraid of the cops, afraid of Maddox, afraid of Kenmore, told each other Elias was kind of difficult, must have done something. Cops don't just slap people for no reason. They said it not because they believed it, but because they needed a story easier to swallow than the truth that the town had let darkness grow in silence. The other half, the people who knew, the ones who'd been pressured, threatened, almost lost their land, stood in kitchens, bars, backyards, and whispered, "They went after Elias means they'll do anything." On the street, Montana State students looked at their phones and muttered that the son of the old guy who got hit. "They say he's a Hell's Angel." The kid next to him shrugged. "Bikers, man, they're trouble. I don't trust those guys." A few steps away, a mother yanked her child's hand when she heard Harley's in the distance. Don't look at those people." Those words were full of the blind prejudice this small town had fed for years about bikers, but not everyone hid inside. In a parking lot near City Hall, Bo Lindell, face still dusted with broken lens glass, was explaining what happened to a small crowd that had gathered. "You don't get it," Bo said, voice thick. He slapped him hard. The old man hit the floor. "I got the whole thing," someone pushed. "But, did the old guy fight back?" Bo spun around, eyes wide, voice sharp. "You think an 82-year-old man attacked a cop twice his size? He got assaulted." The crowd went quiet, not convinced, just scared of the truth, spoken out loud. Bo's words got swallowed by the air where truth is always pushed to the bottom to make room for fear. But what Bo said and what Harper saw wouldn't stay in the dark much longer. As the wall of Harley engines kept getting louder in the distance, Bozeman felt stretched between two forces, the fear choking the people who depended on the police and the rage burning in everyone who'd seen injustice. But on the edge of Highlight Canyon, where the snow was so deep it erased old footprints, a woman was walking shakily down the trail to Elias Carter's silent wooden cabin. It was Mara Kenmore, wife of Sheriff Walt Kenmore. She hugged her coat tight, but the biting cold wasn't what made her whole body shake. It was the fear that had lived in her chest for years in a house called family that felt more like a prison. Mara had never been to Elias's cabin before. She only knew him from townspeople saying that old man is real kind, or he's lived alone since his wife passed, and she'd quietly thought his solitude must be far better than her own marriage. The night before, when Sheriff Kenmore came home after the lying press conference, voice thick with booze and fury, Mara knew something worse than usual had happened. He ranted about the video, the goddamn sneak filming, the trash bikers, and then, as always, threw his glass on the floor. Mara covered her ears. She'd heard it for years. The small USB in her pocket was the only reason her feet kept moving toward the cabin. She knew if she didn't get it out now, no one could save Elias, and no one could save her. When she reached the door, she stood there a moment, trying to breathe deep and calm down. Her hand shook so badly when she knocked that the sound came out weak in the quiet. A minute later, the door cracked open. Elias stood there, face bruised, the handprint on his cheek still swollen and clear. He looked at Mara with surprise but no suspicion. "How can I help you, ma'am?" Elias asked, voice tired but still kind. Mara swallowed hard, clutched the USB, and held it out. I need to give you this. It's important." Elias frowned but opened the door wider and motioned her in. The cabin was warm from the wood stove. The smell of pine made something catch in Mara's throat. It had been a long time since she'd stood anywhere that felt safe. She set the USB on the table, hands shaking so much it almost fell. I don't know how to start," she said, breathing fast. "But on this drive there are emails, recordings, proof of what my husband and Maddox have been doing, not just to you." Elias forgot his own pain, sat down and looked at her. "Go ahead," he said gently. Mara's face twisted with shame, fear, and the decision she'd finally found the courage for. "I overheard them talking about forcing people off their land. There are recordings of Maddox reporting he'd scared people bad enough to sign. There are emails my husband sent Madison Ridge saying land acquisition pressure is slowing. Her voice broke. "I can't take it anymore." Elias nodded slowly. "No rush. You brought it to me. Why?" Mara twisted her hands together, stared at the floor like she was ashamed of her own answer. "Because I can't let an old man get beaten and nobody do anything. Because I know Maddox won't stop. Because," she looked up, eyes red, "because I've been silent too long." Elias looked at the trembling woman in front of him and saw in her eyes not just fear but years of enduring, years of being belittled, controlled, threatened in the place that was supposed to be safest. "Does your husband hurt you?" he asked softly. Mara was quiet a few seconds, like she was weighing whether to say something she'd never told anyone. Then she gave a tiny nod. "He has his ways of keeping me quiet." Nothing graphic, nothing heavy. Just one small sentence that told Elias everything. Mr. Carter closed his eyes for a second, hurting not just from his face or body but from all the pain behind Maddox and Kenmore that no video captured, that no social media knew about. "You did the right thing," Elias said quietly. "Late or early, right is still right." Mara brought a hand to her mouth. Tears fell. She couldn't stop, not from pain but because for the first time in years someone told her she was right, that she didn't have to suffer alone. "I don't know what'll happen to me when he finds out I brought this here," Mara said, voice shaking. "But if I don't, he'll hurt more people. I can't let it keep going." Elias looked at her, eyes softening, then said, "He'll find out. But this time, he's not the most powerful man in this town anymore." Through the cabin window, the distant rumble of Harleys rolled in, deep and steady like thunder across the ground. Mara turned toward the sound, tears still wet on her cheeks, and in the chaos of fear and hope she whispered, almost to herself, "They're here." Elias nodded. "Yeah. And they never leave family behind." Mara clenched her fists, straightened her back like she'd reclaimed something long lost. "I'll stand with you," she said, "whatever happens." From that moment, Mara Kenmore's life turned a corner. She was no longer the woman hiding in the shadows, but the first one brave enough to step into the light and open the door to the collapse of the rotten system ruling Bozeman. As Mara stepped away from Elias's cabin, the distant Harley rumble was no longer a faint echo. It had turned into real sound, growing louder, thicker, like a storm slamming against Bozeman's front door. At first one engine, then two, then three, but so fast that within minutes the entire Hyalite Canyon Valley shook as if hundreds of steel beasts were charging in the same direction. When Mara walked down the porch steps, wind whipping her hair, she looked toward the end of the trail. Tiny black dots were approaching, too many to count. This wasn't a tourist convoy. This wasn't college kids on a road trip. This was Harley Davidsons, hundreds of them, stretching from the foothills all the way to the road into town. 6 Hells Angels chapters: Big Sky, Billings Butte, Great Falls, Missoula and Idaho Falls, rolling in at the same time, something that had never happened in Bozeman's history. The mountains amplified the sound into rolling thunder that sent deer scattering from the tree line. As the column poured onto Main Street, townspeople started locking doors. Store owners stood behind plate glass, heads lowered, staring out with a mix of fear and confusion. Housewives yanked kids inside as if those bikes were a tornado warning. Montana State students lined the sidewalks, filming on their phones, mouths open, unable to believe Bozeman had become the epicenter of one of the biggest biker gatherings the Northwest had ever seen. Yet no one could look away, because it was both terrifying and breathtaking. A moving wall of steel flowing in perfect rhythm, a black wave tearing through the snow-white heart of town. Leather cuts, shades, ink, Hell's Angels patches with the winged death head flapping in the wind. An old man in front of the lumber store whispered, "Never seen that many Harleys, not even at a parade." A woman said, "Hope they don't start trouble." The man beside her answered, "Trouble already started, and it wasn't from them." When the first bikes reached downtown right in front of City Hall, 5 local news trucks were already parked. Reporters from Billings, Missoula and Helena had been dispatched the moment the Elias slap video went viral. A young KRTV reporter spoke into her camera. "This is an unprecedented situation. 6 major Hells Angels chapters are flooding into Bozeman after video surfaced of an 82-year-old veteran being assaulted." A local pushed into frame, voice shaking. Are they here for revenge? But the question was swallowed by what happened next. Jackson Carter, leading over 300 bikers, turned into the open plaza in front of the public safety building. His glossy black street glide slid lightly on the snow and stopped just steps from the sheriff's entrance. He swung off, pulled off his helmet, revealing a face cold as ice and eyes burning with a rage so deep even the reporters took a step back. Behind him, 300 bikes shut down in unison. The roar faded into silence, so heavy it felt like the air was sucked out of everyone's lungs. Jackson took 3 steps forward and stood dead center under hundreds of cameras pointed at him. He didn't yell. He didn't raise a fist. He didn't flex. He simply said, low, clear, and loud enough for every mic to catch, "We're here to protect justice for a veteran." A collective exhale rippled through the crowd as if those words stabbed straight into the town's hidden shame. The Billings reporter blurted, "You said protect justice for Mr. Elias." Jackson stared straight into the lens, eyes cutting through the falling snow like blades. "He's my father, a patriot, a man who didn't deserve to be disrespected." A biker beside Jackson spoke loud enough for the press to hear. The whole world saw the video. "He didn't do anything wrong." Another reporter asked, "Are you here to confront the police?" Jackson looked at him, no smile, no anger, just a slight shake of the head. "We're here for honor," he said. Because he's one of the men who built this country with hands that shake but never quit. Because Bozeman forgot that. Those words shot through the crowd like electricity. Many locals couldn't wince and couldn't meet Jackson's eyes, but they couldn't look away from the truth he'd just laid bare. This town had stayed quiet too long while Kenmore and Maddox abused power, and that silence had led to an 82-year-old man being slapped in broad daylight. Up on the City Hall steps, a handful of deputies stood scattered, faces going pale at the sheer number of bikers assembling. Kenmore hadn't shown himself yet, but everyone knew he was watching from a high window. He definitely wasn't happy, definitely wasn't ready, definitely didn't have enough men to control the situation, and most importantly, definitely didn't have enough lies left to explain to the entire country why an old man was being illegally detained after being assaulted. A reporter shouted, "Jackson, what do you want?" Jackson turned and looked up at the building. "I want my father. Right now, and I want the truth." Another biker yelled, "And we want to look the man who slapped him right in the eye." The townspeople shivered. Deputies stepped back. Cameras swung wildly, but Jackson raised a hand and every biker behind him went dead silent. He didn't need a riot. He didn't need threats. He only needed the truth, and the truth was ready to come out. In the distance, more engines still rumbled. 3 more columns were still pouring into Bozeman. A local standing near Harper whispered, "I used to be scared of bikers, but today, I think they're the only ones who stood up." Harper didn't answer. She just stared at Jackson standing in the white snow, black leather, eyes burning like fire, and she knew Bozeman would never be the same again, because the justice Elias never asked for had arrived, and it rode in on 300 Harleys, while Jackson's words, "We're here to protect justice for a veteran," still echoed across Bozeman's Central Plaza. The city hall doors burst open. Sheriff Walt Kenmore strode out, 8 deputies in front, followed by almost the entire Gallatin County force. They fanned out in a line across the top steps, body armor on, hands on belts, forming a wall between the bikers and the building. Townspeople took several steps back. No one dared breathe loud. An old lady whispered to the person beside her, "Dear God, what are they about to do?" Kenmore narrowed his eyes at the silent but massive sea of bikers, then locked onto Jackson. His smile was thin as a razor. "Bozeman doesn't welcome bikers. What do you want?" None of the hundreds of bikers answered. Only Jackson took one step forward, eyes never leaving Kenmore. "My father, and the truth." Kenmore let out a loud, mocking laugh, as if he'd just heard the dumbest thing ever. "The truth? The truth is that old man assaulted an officer. The video was edited. The internet doesn't know shit." He spoke loud, trying to make sure every news camera caught it, "and I will not let a bunch of bikers come in here and cause chaos." At that moment, one of the deputies behind Kenmore leaned in and whispered something. Kenmore glanced at the Harley column again, his eyes tightening. He'd just been told at least 3 more chapters were still inbound. He wasn't facing a group of bikers. He was facing a force the entire Gallatin County Sheriff's Office couldn't control, but he still tried to keep his cool. "Jackson Carter," he announced loudly, "you brought a whole army here to do what? Threaten me?" Jackson didn't answer. He just stared at Kenmore for a long moment before saying, slow and deliberate, "Nobody needs to threaten you. The truth will get here on its own." At that exact second, the crowd parted as a figure appeared on the bottom step, right behind the line of deputies, Mara Kenmore. Her face was pale with fear but resolute, clutching her purse under her coat. As she stepped forward, Kenmore whipped around, face draining of color. "Mara, get inside." His voice was heavy with threat, but Mara didn't stop. She walked straight through the line of deputies, down the steps like someone finally leaving a cage that had held her for years. The townspeople started whispering. The bikers went silent. Jackson looked at Mara, and he knew. She walked right up to him. No tears, no shaking, just the determination of a woman who had decided to end years of wrong. Standing in front of Jackson, Mara reached into her pocket, pulled out the small USB drive, and held it up for the crowd. "I have something everyone needs to hear," she said, voice thick but clear, "and it will change everything." Kenmore screamed, "Mara, don't," but his words were drowned out by dozens of live cameras switching on at once. Harper, standing at the edge of the crowd, eyes wide, brought a hand to her mouth, realizing what was about to happen. Bo Lindell, hiding a borrowed camera from a friend, stepped forward and held his mic toward Mara. Mara looked up, stared straight at the wall of deputies behind her. "I've been silent for years," she said, "but I can't stand by while an old man gets beaten, illegally locked up, and then lied about." Then she handed the USB to Bo. "Play it." Bo nodded, plugged the drive into the small laptop he'd brought just in case. His live stream screen lit up, projecting for the crowd and broadcasting nationwide. An audio file appeared. Its name made Kenmore go white. Meeting_Kenmore_Maddox_Dev_01. Bo hit play. Kenmore's voice came first, clear, commanding, unmistakable. "Elias Carter won't sell unless we make him scared. Maddox, make him feel the pressure. No need for violence, just let him know who's in charge." Another voice cut in. "Maddox, drunk and bored. Old man stubborn, but I'll handle it. A few threats and he'll sign." Then the creak of chairs, indifferent laughter. "If not, I'll create cause. Then we hold him a few days. Nobody will know." The crowd gasped like a bomb had gone off. Harper clutched her chest, breathing fast. A local whispered, voice shaking. So, it was all staged. The audio kept going, peeling back every layer of lies. Madison Ridge wants that parcel in 2 weeks. We can't slow down anymore. Move fast. Then Kenmore snapping. Don't go too far. I don't want trouble with the public. Maddox laughing. Your public is scared of you. Nobody's gonna open their mouth. When that line played, the entire plaza fell into a terrifying silence. The people of Bozeman, who had lived under Kenmore's shadow for years, looked at each other and saw shame, rage, and the truth they'd always known, but never dared say. Kenmore stepped down 2 steps, face red as fire. Turn it off, now. But Bose stood in front of the laptop, eyes unflinching. I'm not turning it off, he said. The whole country is watching. A few deputies looked at Kenmore, then at Mara, then at the crowd, and for the first time they realized they were on the wrong side. Kenmore lunged, but before he could reach Bo, Jackson stepped forward, not touching anyone, just blocking the path, eyes ice cold, saying, "One more step." It wasn't a threat, it was the last moral line Kenmore could cross, and he knew he didn't dare. Right then Maddox pushed out from behind the deputy line. He saw the scene, the audio, the furious townspeople, the bikers surrounding them, and completely lost control. "It's all lies," he screamed. That old bastard deserved. He reached for his belt, not drawing his gun, but the motion was too fast and too reckless in front of hundreds of witnesses. 2 deputies beside him instantly grabbed his arms. One shouted, "Hands down, Maddox." Maddox thrashed, screaming incoherent words like a cornered animal. Kenmore spun around. "Get your hands off him. He's mine." But it was too late. A veteran deputy, 20 years on the force, walked up slowly, removed Maddox's sidearm from its holster with practiced ease, like disarming a live bomb. "You don't get to carry this anymore," he said. "Not after what we just heard," Maddox screamed, but his scream was drowned out by townspeople starting to chant in rhythm. "Justice! Justice!" Mara stood there, tears running down her face but a faint smile like she could finally breathe. Jackson turned to her, gave a small nod of thanks, a nod from someone who understood she had just lit the match that burned away the darkness over this town. Kenmore, face white, lost in the furious crowd. While the chant of justice still echoed across Bozeman's plaza, City Hall felt torn in half between the exposed truth and the panic spreading from Kenmore. There was no way back for him now. Just 1 hour after the audio went public, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office phones rang off the hook. But this time it wasn't scared residents calling for help. It was calls from Helena, from the Montana Department of Justice. A special investigative team was dispatched on an emergency basis, carrying files, recorders, and authority that overrode everything Kenmore had ever used to cover his crimes. When 3 unmarked black state SUVs rolled up at the end of Main Street, the townspeople buzzed. The bikers stood silent, and Kenmore, for the first time after years of ruling Bozeman through fear, took a step back. An agent walked up, flashed credentials. "We have evidence of abuse of power, cover-ups, and conspiracy to illegally seize property. Sheriff Kenmore, you are being detained for investigation." Kenmore blurted, I'm the sheriff here. I have rights." "Your rights ended the moment you decided to stand above the law," the agent replied, voice flat as steel. The people of Bozeman watched him get cuffed, and in that moment the fear they had carried for years shattered like an empty shell. He struggled, eyes darting for Maddox to give orders, but Maddox was already locked in the same cell he'd dragged Elias into that morning. 2 young deputies were ordered to escort Kenmore, but they didn't handle him like a sheriff. They handled him like a criminal they'd been forced to endure for years. When the SUV door slammed shut, corners of the street that once knew Kenmore's swagger suddenly felt strange, and strange in a way that tasted like sweet justice. On the other side of the sheriff's office, Maddox was dragged out of his cell for transfer to state custody. His face was purple, eyes bulging, mouth spewing uncontrolled words, but no one was listening. No one wanted to listen anymore. The agent read the charges. "Cole Maddox, you are under arrest for assault, falsifying reports, abuse of power, and conspiracy to extort private property." He spat a curse, but a veteran deputy nearby, the one Maddox had screamed at countless times, said quietly but clearly, "You should shut up. Nobody here is covering for you anymore." Maddox whipped around, eyes wide like he couldn't believe a colleague had just said that. But that was exactly what was happening. The system he'd leaned on had collapsed right under him. No one was hiding evidence for him. No one was deleting files. No one believed he was the law anymore. Another agent asked, "Anything you want to say before we take you away?" Maddox screamed, "That biker. He came here to riot. The agent cut him off. "Nobody hit the old man except you, and the whole country saw it." As they walked Maddox past the bikers, not one of them laid a hand on him. They just stared him down with eyes that held no hate, only contempt for the man who beat a defenseless old veteran. Maddox shook, not from the cold, but because for the first time he realized how truly small he was. At the same time, in a Denver conference room, a frantic emergency meeting exploded at Madison Ridge Development. The CEO slammed the table. Evidence leaked. Emails, audio, police video too. Another shouted, "Bozeman is swarming with press. We can't save this project. Cut losses. Pull out of Montana now. Not one more inch." In 30 minutes, Madison Ridge withdrew every team from Gallatin County, froze the resort project, scrubbed Bozeman from their website, and emailed their lawyers. Terminate all contact with Sheriff Kenmore. The people who thought they could buy an entire town with money were now running like rats when the lights came on. But the collapse wasn't just at the top, it spread to every corner of the sheriff's office. A young deputy who had watched Maddox slap Elias but stayed silent, stepped forward in front of the crowd, removed his badge and said, "I'm sorry, I can't keep serving in a department like this." A local started crying. A biker nearby put a hand on the deputy's shoulder and said nothing. While Kenmore and Maddox were taken away, townspeople began gathering, one by one, as if waking from a long nightmare. An old lady said, "I knew they were wrong, but I never dared speak." The man beside her answered, "Nobody blames you. We were all scared." Harper stood in the crowd, tears falling as she watched Maddox being led away, not from fear, but because right had finally won. Bose stood beside her, hands still shaking, but eyes full of the determination of someone who knew his video had ignited the truth. Jackson stood near the city hall steps, saying nothing, not smiling, not sighing in relief. He just looked at Mara Kenmore, the woman who had risked everything to get that USB out. She nodded at him, and he nodded back, like two people who had just signed a wordless agreement. From now on, Bozeman would no longer be ruled by fear. As the sun dropped behind the Bridger Mountains, the shadow of City Hall stretched across the plaza, but for the first time in years it no longer felt like a threat. It looked like a curtain coming down on an old stage and opening a new one. At the center of that new stage, the men who thought they were untouchable were led away in handcuffs. And the people who had been dismissed, an old man, a waitress, a freelance videographer, an abused wife, and a tattooed biker, stood tall, watching the collapse of the rotten system they never thought would fall. A new era was beginning in Bozeman, and it all started with one slap Maddox never imagined would change his life and change this town forever. As the sun set after a day of upheaval, Bozeman seemed to let out a long breath, as if the town had finally shaken off a heavy shadow that had pressed down on it for years. And while Kenmore and Maddox were driven away in state vehicles, a different journey began, one of healing a community fractured by fear, by silence, by things no one had dared say out loud. The first thing the bikers did wasn't celebrate or claim credit. They rode straight to Highlight Canyon. The column of Harleys cut through the falling snow with headlights glowing yellow, heading for Elias's old cabin, weathered boards, leaky roof, porch leaning from years of neglect. Elias stood on the porch in his coat, eyes a mix of surprise and confusion as dozens of men and women in leather climbed off their bikes carrying tools, drills, saws, ladders, cans of fresh paint. Stone, vice president of the Big Sky chapter, walked up and clapped Elias on the shoulder. "Old man, you don't have to say anything. This is family business." Then, without waiting, they got to work in the snow like they'd planned it all along. Some climbed the roof to replace shingles, others added insulation. A crew fixed the cabin floor, another rebuilt the fence. The sound of saws, hammers, and generators mixed with the wind, creating a strange music, the music of restoration. Elias stood there a long time, not knowing how to voice his gratitude. When Jackson came to his side, the old man just rested a hand on his son's arm and said, "Your mother, if she were still here, she'd be real proud." Jackson said nothing. He just squeezed his father's hand, the way bikers hug the people they love without making a big show of it. While the cabin was being rebuilt, Harper Quinn sat in her small apartment at the edge of town, emptiness still weighing on her. She'd lost her job for doing the right thing. That evening there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, Doc and 3 other bikers stood there, each holding a cardboard box. "Harper," Doc said, "we heard you got fired. We don't let good people pay a price for doing what's right." He handed her the first box. Inside were coffee makers, grinders, to-go cups, condensed milk, sugar, everything needed to run a small coffee stand. Harper's mouth fell open. Before she could react, another biker handed her the second box: cash, small bills, some larger ones, and an envelope stuffed with donations the 6 chapters had collected. "Open your place. We'll be your first customers." Harper started crying and hugged the box like it was new hope. She didn't just get a new job, she got her faith back that doing the right thing is never wasted. At the same time, Bo Lindell, the kid who shot the video, stood in the temporary office of an independent paper in Bozeman. After his clip went everywhere, he got dozens of job offers. One local paper asked, "You want a reporter position?" Bo looked at the camera he was adjusting and answered, "I don't want to work for anybody. I want to tell people's stories, the ones nobody else dares to cover." That same night, he launched his own independent news channel. When he posted his first video, The Truth About the Elias Carter Case, it hit over 100,000 views in hours. That night, Harper texted him, "You saved him." Bo replied, "No, the truth saved him." But the person who changed the most wasn't Bo or Harper, it was Mara Kenmore. After turning over the USB and becoming the key witness, she was placed in a state-funded domestic violence support program, where she met other women who understood the silence only they had lived. A counselor sat down, took her hand, and said, "You did something most people never find the courage for." Mara cried, for the first time not from fear, but from relief. She was given temporary work at a community office, legal help to file for divorce, and a safe place to stay. One day, walking down Main Street, she saw hundreds of bikers lining the road, passing out hot water and talking with locals. Many recognized her, but this time they didn't look away. They no longer saw the sheriff's wife. An older woman walked up and gently took Mara's hand. "Thank you for speaking up." Mara squeezed back, eyes shining but stronger than ever. The next morning, Elias's cabin stood proud, no longer crooked or broken, reborn. Harper opened a small coffee stand right across from City Hall with a big sign, "Harper's Brew, where truth comes black." Bo became the town's indispensable watcher, the guy everyone now called our justice reporter. And Mara, the woman who once flinched at her husband's footsteps, now walked through town with her back straight, eyes clear, spirit like a small steady light in the cold streets. This community had once been torn apart by fear and prejudice, but thanks to one kind old man, a 30-second video, a brave waitress, an independent journalist, a wife who finally stood up, and the arrival of hundreds of bikers everyone assumed were dangerous, Bozeman was healing, little by little. And far off, the steady rumble of Harleys still echoed from the roads around the Bridgers, reminding everyone that justice doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it rides a Harley in faded leather and the loyal hearts of people who've been misunderstood their whole lives. The morning of the first hearing at the Gallatin County Courthouse, Bozeman was still dusted with thin snow, as if reminding the town it had once been frozen under fear, and now people were learning how to thaw, how to look at each other differently. Locals packed the courtroom, not to watch someone be humiliated, but to see something they never thought possible: a man who abused power finally facing justice and a community standing up for what's right. Maddox was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, hands uncuffed but flanked by 2 deputies like guardrails. His face no longer carried the arrogance or sneer from the day he walked into the Gallatin diner, just red, sunken eyes that trembled slightly, as if the truth had drained the blood from his body. Whispers rose from the gallery, but when Maddox sat and looked up into Elias Carter's eyes, every sound died. Elias wasn't angry. He held no hate. It was a look Maddox had never faced, the look of a man who had suffered but refused to let suffering turn him cruel. The prosecutor read the charges: abuse of power, falsifying reports, assault, conspiracy with developers to force land sales. With every count, Maddox sank deeper into his chair like he wanted to disappear. When the prosecutor asked, "Cole Maddox, do you wish to say anything before we proceed?" Maddox swallowed hard. His throat closed like a stone was stuck there. He glanced around the room. Townspeople, bikers, reporters, people he once believed would always be afraid of him. Then he looked again at Elias, the man he had slapped to the floor. Maddox stood, hands clenched. He tried to speak, but only a ragged breath came out. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then tears rolled down. He brought a hand to his face, too late to hide them. He cried, not loud sobs, but heavy, stone-like crying, as if he had just opened a door he'd kept locked his entire life. I was wrong. The courtroom went dead silent. Maddox drew a shaky breath and tried to steady his voice. I did the worst thing an officer can do. I hurt an old man. I abused my authority. I thought I was allowed to. I thought nobody would ever say anything. He turned to the townspeople. I'm sorry to all of you. I'm sorry to Bozeman. I'm sorry to everyone I threatened and hurt. Then he faced Elias. And I'm sorry to you, Mr. Carter. I had no excuse. I was wrong. He bowed his head, deep. For the first time in his life, Maddox looked small. The judge asked, Mr. Elias Carter, do you wish to speak before we continue? Elias rose. Jackson watched his father with pride and worry in his eyes. Elias walked to the microphone, posture slightly stooped but voice clear, slow, and resonant like old wood. I didn't come here for revenge, Elias said. I don't want to see another person crushed by hate. Maddox looked up, stunned. Elias met his gaze for a long time and said, I've lived long enough to know one truth. Nobody fixes their mistakes while being hated. People only fix them when they're given a chance to become better. The courtroom held its breath. Elias continued, I forgive you, Maddox, but forgiveness doesn't mean no consequences. Maddox nodded, tears falling again. Elias said, you'll face your punishment. But what I want to see is you spend the rest of your life repairing what you broke. You want redemption? Prove it with actions. Harper watched Elias through wet eyes. Bull gripped his camera, recording every word, knowing this wasn't just one town story anymore. It was a lesson for many others. Jackson stood leaning, fists clenched but eyes softening. He had been ready to hate Maddox forever, but his father's words made him reconsider. The judge waited for Elias to sit, then struck the gavel. Mr. Carter's statement will be entered into the record. Then he looked at Maddox. Public safety must be protected, and your responsibility is enormous. However, the court also acknowledges your admission of guilt. A second of silence. Then the judge ruled, Cole Maddox will serve the statutory sentence, followed by mandatory rehabilitation, community service, and full cooperation in the Madison Ridge development investigation. Any future violence or abuse of power will result in the maximum penalty. Maddox nodded. For the first time in his life, not fighting back. When the hearing ended, 2 deputies led him away. He didn't look down or up, just straight ahead, as if Elias had just placed a path in front of him he never thought existed. Passing Jackson, Maddox paused half a second. The 2 men looked at each other. No hate, no fear, just 2 men standing at opposite ends of truth, and finally choosing not to let darkness define them anymore. Jackson gave a small nod. Maddox bowed his head in return. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't erasing the pain. It was acknowledgement that justice isn't only punishment, it's also the chance to change. When Maddox was gone, and the courtroom doors closed, Elias stood leaning lightly on his cane, looked at his son and said, You see, sometimes strength isn't hitting back, it's knowing when to let go. Jackson swallowed hard. He didn't answer, but in his eyes was a sky full of admiration for the man who had taught him what real goodness looks like, even in the face of evil. And that was the moment Bozeman healed one step further, not by Harleys, not by force, but by the forgiveness of a man the whole town owed an apology to. Spring came to Highlight Canyon gently, like nature's own apology after a long, brutal winter. Snow melted slowly, revealing damp earth and the first patches of green under tall pines. Mountain birds returned, landing on the cabin roof singing clear notes that turned a place once heavy with silence into something soft, almost sacred. Elias's cabin, once old and leaning, now stood solid in the valley, living proof of the biker hands that rebuilt it in the freezing cold. New walls, new roof, new porch, even the little wooden chair Elias loved had been sanded smooth and repainted. Every morning, Elias stepped outside, breathed deep the smell of young pine. His eyes no longer shadowed like the day he was beaten, but bright and calm, the eyes of a man who had walked through a storm and knew he was still loved. Jackson visited often, sometimes weekly, sometimes every 3 days. He always parked right in front, killed the engine so the Harley growl wouldn't break the peace, then climbed the steps with hot coffee or takeout from Harper's new place. Every time Elias saw his son, he smiled, not a big smile, but warm, the kind only fathers who once feared losing their child truly understand. You drove all that way again? Elias would ask. Jackson would shrug. Long rides, nothing. I know you hate being alone. One morning while Elias brewed coffee and Jackson checked a siding board, an older man in a pickup pulled up. He wore an old suit jacket with a veteran pin on the chest. "Heard this cabin's open to brothers," he said, voice rough. Elias nodded. "If you serve this country, the door's always open." From that day on, the cabin became a stop for veterans from all over Montana. They came for coffee, told old stories, sat together on the rebuilt porch, sometimes silent for hours because they didn't need many words to understand each other. And the bikers came too, not to show off or make noise, but to help teaching vets how to use smartphones, fixing chairs, clearing trails, bringing baked goods and leaving without waiting for thanks. One day Harper visited the cabin for the first time since the hearing. She brought a bag of cinnamon rolls and shyly said, "The new coffee stand's packed. The bikers keep coming." Elias smiled warmly. "Because they know who had the guts to tell the truth." Harper blushed but glowed. Woe dropped by now and then. Camera slung over his shoulder, documenting Bozeman's recovery. Townspeople no longer avoided Bode, no longer looked away from Harper, no longer stared at bikers with blind fear. They had seen the bikers stand with Elias in court. They had seen them fix the cabin in the snow. They had seen them raise money for Harper, help Mara escape her marriage, protect the town when truth needed a loud voice. And slowly, fear turned to respect. Respect turned to trust. One day while Elias and Jackson were fixing the porch steps, an 8-year-old boy walked by and stared at Jackson's Harley in awe. "Your bike's so cool," he said. His mom nervously pulled him back, but Jackson smiled. "Want to sit on it for a picture?" The kid's eyes lit up. His mom watched a moment, then nodded. The boy climbed on, hands on the bars like he was riding a real war horse. His mom said, "Thank you. I know you're not what people say." Jackson just nodded. "We just do what's right." The whole town started seeing bikers differently, not as trouble, not as a symbol of danger, but as men and women who live by honor, loyalty, and unconditional kindness. When spring reached the mountain peaks, snow gone, crystal streams running past the cabin, sunlight painting the Montana sky soft orange gold, Elias sat on his porch chair watching his son laugh with a few bikers arguing over who grilled better steaks. He closed his eyes, soaking in a peace he thought was lost forever. The day Maddox attacked him. Now he saw Highlight Canyon full of light, light of truth, of justice, of people no one expected to become heroes. Elias opened his eyes, looked at everyone around him, then at Jackson, the son on a Harley who brought light back into his life. And as the spring wind blew through the pines carrying the smell of sap and barbecue, Elias said something that made everyone laugh, but no one argued with. "Not all angels have wings. Some ride Harleys." Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep riding along with these emotional stories of bikers and everyday goodness. See you on the next journey, where the wingless angels are still out there tearing up the road on their Harleys.